In the bustling heart of ancient Rome, beneath the splendor of marble temples and the roar of the Senate, a darker economy thrived in silence, the slave markets. And within that human commerce, one group endured a fate both troubling and largely forgotten: enslaved boys, trafficked not for labor or war, but for roles within elite private households. What would it mean to be a delicatus, a term the Romans used for a favored young male slave, often selected for his refined appearance and demeanor? To the crowd in the Forum or the elite circles of Palatine Hill, these boys were viewed as property, no different than furniture or livestock. Public auctions were held in locations like the Forum Boarium, near the Tiber River, where enslaved individuals stood on platforms with placards listing their origin, skills, and physical condition. Young boys, often Greek, Thracian, Syrian, or Phrygian, were valued for their refinement and appearance, their price determined by perceived elegance and potential. Some were taken as spoils of war, others were sold by impoverished families in the provinces. The Roman satirist Juvenal, writing in the 1st century CE, mocked the elite's excesses, declaring, "A curly-haired boy costs more than a farm." His words exposed not just indulgence, but the empire's moral contradictions, where human lives were traded alongside cattle and grain. Once purchased, the life of such a slave became one of constant oversight, training, and restriction. Those destined for domestic roles in elite households were often subjected to strict discipline, and their days were spent grooming, performing, serving, or simply maintaining appearances. In the private quarters of Rome's elite, where senators plotted and poets recited, these boys lived under tight control in luxurious but confined conditions. The Roman Empire did not merely tolerate this system, it institutionalized it. The buying and selling of enslaved boys for household service was neither rare nor secret. It was part of the luxury economy of the imperial elite. And yet, this was only the beginning. For the most highly valued among them, the situation intensified, because for the emperor's household, ownership was not enough. Control had to be absolute. Castration as control, the imperial court's secret practice. To the Roman elite, power was not merely exercised through conquest and law, it extended into every aspect of life, including the domination of enslaved individuals within the imperial household. Nowhere was this more evident than in the use of eunuchs in the Roman court, enslaved boys and young men whose altered status symbolized submission, hierarchy, and exclusivity. Within the imperial palace on the Palatine Hill, eunuchs known as spadones served as slaves to emperors and nobles. These were not isolated practices but reflected Rome's complex relationship with Eastern customs. Though Roman writers often criticized eunuchs as symbols of Eastern effeminacy, the elite continued to employ them, particularly those from Parthia and Asia Minor, highlighting the contradictions within Roman cultural ideals. Historical records suggest that castration, though technically illegal under the Lex Cornelia, was at times carried out to preserve certain physical traits favored in elite circles. While Roman medical texts avoid describing the procedure in detail, later sources refer to painful and dangerous methods. Many enslaved individuals reportedly suffered severe consequences due to the lack of effective medical care. The contradiction in Roman law is striking. While castration was formally banned, enforcement was inconsistent, especially when elite households were involved. As the empire expanded, so did this contradiction. Enslaved boys from regions like Cappadocia, Galatia, and Syria were brought into Rome and became symbols of wealth and imperial reach. Inside the imperial household, these enslaved youths were stripped of autonomy and subjected to constant control. Their altered status ensured dependence and removed any possibility of disrupting lineage or social order, key concerns of the Roman aristocracy. This practice, though rarely acknowledged openly, functioned as a calculated tool for preserving elite power. Yet for many of these enslaved individuals, life within the emperor's private sphere remained one of ritual, limitation, and unrecognized service. The emperor's slaves, hidden lives inside Rome's imperial court. Stripped of freedom, family, and personal agency, many enslaved boys in ancient Rome were absorbed into the private spheres of the imperial elite, rarely emerging again with an identity of their own. One of the most notable examples was Sporus, an enslaved youth reportedly brought into Emperor Nero's inner circle. According to Suetonius in the 12 Caesars, Nero arranged for Sporus to undergo a physical alteration, dressed him in women's garments, and held a public ceremony in which he referred to him as his wife. Sporus accompanied Nero in public, sat beside him at events, and resided in the imperial household. The emperor reportedly called him Sabina, echoing the name of his dead spouse. Historians interpret this act not as love, but as a demonstration of dramatic control and extreme excess. But Sporus was not alone. Roman sources refer to others, special boys, castrated boys, and chosen boys, enslaved youths selected for their appearance and assigned to perform polished roles within elite settings. These boys were often trained in music, poetry, and dance. They poured wine at banquets, attended to guests in bathhouses, and entertained with practiced performances. Their grace and discipline were praised, though their names were rarely remembered. Roman poets like Martial and Catullus mentioned such slaves in passing, sometimes negatively, sometimes with respect. Yet behind the luxury, there was hardship. The court was a place marked by political games, favor-seeking, and sudden shifts in fortune. If a slave fell out of favor, or worse, was seen as disloyal, they could be beaten, imprisoned, or killed without consequence. Suetonius tells us that under Emperor Tiberius, the villa at Capri became known for disturbing rumors. While such stories may carry political angle, the repeated nature of these reports across sources shows real concerns about abuse of power. What made their lives especially sad was the strange mix of being seen but not heard. These enslaved youths were shown off as symbols of wealth and beauty, but had no real control. They could live in marble houses and sleep on golden beds, yet stayed under strict control. Roman society, deeply concerned with status and image, saw their condition not as a problem, but as a sign of rich people's power. To be such a slave in the Roman Empire was to live near the seat of power, but to stay powerless. Admired and used, yet never truly free, their lives were carefully planned performances made to reflect the values of a society that saw beauty and control as always going together. Rome's business in enslaved boys showed an empire where style covered suffering, and political power was kept strong through control over people. Practices such as body change, public show, and forced obedience changed the way court power worked, and still warn us today how unchecked power can harm the human soul. Their fate reminds us that even the most smart-looking societies can hide cruelty behind art, law, and ritual acts. How might the quiet stories of these castrated servants change your view of Roman greatness? Comment below. As Juvenal asked, who will guard the guards themselves?